Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the Michelle Carter case. Another question here is, was she guilty of involuntary manslaughter? This case was featured in an HBO documentary called I Love You, Now Die, a title which seems to sum up the case pretty well. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. I will go through the background, the timeline of the crime, the trial, and then look at the mental health and personality factors. So starting with the background, Michelle Carter was born in Massachusetts in 1996. Sometime around age 8, she had an eating disorder develop, and she started taking psychotropic medications when she was 14. She was described as a good student who was polite, caring, helpful, somewhat isolated, and socially awkward. Conrad Roy was born in 1995. He graduated from high school and also earned a captain's license. He had hopes of working in his family's marine salvage business. In videos he made of himself, he said that he was socially anxious, depressed, that he would never be successful, and that he was wired differently. Not long before his death, his grades were dropping, and he was having racing thoughts, trouble focusing, and memory problems. He had made 4 attempts to bring an end to his life prior to the attempt that would cause his death in 2014. Carter and Roy were introduced to one another in Florida in 2012. They were both visiting relatives there. They started this unusual quasi-romantic relationship. They would only meet in person a few times over the next 2 years. They primarily communicated via text and email. During this time, it's not really clear what they were to one another. It appears as though Carter believed Roy was her boyfriend. Roy appears to have believed this as well at certain times, but at other times he referred to Carter as a friend. Roy had expressed several times that he wanted to bring an end to his life. For about 2 years, Carter attempted to dissuade Roy from this course of action, asking him to seek counseling and generally being supportive to him. Now moving to the timeline. In the weeks leading up to July 13, 2014, Carter's encouragement took a different form. This corresponded with the change in her medication, but it's not really clear if that really caused any change in her behavior related to this case. Instead of being supportive and encouraging him to seek therapy, she started encouraging him to follow through with his plan. Sometime late in the day, on July 12, 2014, Roy drove his pickup truck to a Kmart parking lot after securing a gasoline-powered water pump. Roy talked to Carter at 6:28 p.m. for over 40 minutes and again at 7:12 p.m. for over 40 minutes. He started the water pump, which released exhaust containing carbon monoxide into the cab of the truck, and this caused his death. It is believed he died on July 13, 2014. Not long after his death, thousands of text messages transmitted between Roy and Carter were found on his phone. Carter was charged in February of 2015 with involuntary manslaughter because she wantonly and recklessly encouraged Roy to cause his own death. So that was the theory behind the charge. Now moving to the trial. Many states have laws that make it illegal for one person to encourage or assist another in a suicide. Massachusetts did not have a law like this. That's why the district attorney used the involuntary manslaughter charge instead. Just before the jury trial was set to begin, the defense decided to go with an unusual strategy. They elected to have a bench trial. So that's a trial where the judge determines the verdict as opposed to a jury. I think there were a couple reasons for this. The emotional reaction that many people had to this case would not have favored Michelle Carter, like the jury may be too worked up with emotions. And I think the defense believed that this case came down to a technical interpretation of the law and that the judge would be in a better position to see how this charge did not actually align with Carter's behavior. So I'll go over the case of the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution had this theory that Carter was dependent, needy, and socially awkward. Because of these characteristics, she devised this plan to encourage Roy to cause his own death so that she could be the center of attention. She could paint herself as the supportive girlfriend who was also a victim of this tragedy. It all sounds a little bit like Munchausen by proxy, where the individual wants other people to feel sorry for them. The prosecution argued that Carter had sent many messages prior to Roy's death that rose to the level of wanton and reckless. They said Carter sent out messages to her friends to see if anybody would be sympathetic if she reported that Roy was missing. So these messages were like tests. So she was trying to gauge other people's reactions. Additionally, they argued that Carter had encouraged Roy when they were talking on the phone on the evening of July 12. In a text message that Carter sent to one of her friends 2 weeks after Roy's death, she said that Roy had stepped out of his truck when he was on the phone with her, and that she encouraged him to get back inside the vehicle. So, of course, the vehicle at that point was filling with carbon monoxide. The prosecution argued that after Roy's death, Carter's behavior was consistent with somebody trying to garner attention. They suggested that she enjoyed all of the people feeling sorry for her. The defense essentially said that Roy and Carter were mentally ill and immature. Both of them were confused because of psychotropic medications. The mental health professional who worked for the defense argued that Carter was involuntarily intoxicated. So he was really trying to paint the medication as the villain in this case. Now, that idea that somebody can be involuntarily intoxicated by medication is somewhat controversial. I think under some circumstances, this could be true. Somebody could essentially become intoxicated from prescription medications, but that's not very common, and it's really not clear if anything like that was happening in this case. The defense argued that Roy was the person who caused his death, and that Carter's actions did not change the outcome. Roy had made 4 prior attempts, as I mentioned, and he had searched the internet hundreds of times, using terms related to how he could cause his own death. They argued that Carter was attempting to help Roy. He wanted to follow through with his plan, he asked for her help, and she did what she believed he wanted. In June of 2017, the judge found Carter guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The case really hinged on a text message that Carter sent to her friend 2 weeks after Roy's death, in which she states that she encouraged Roy to get back in that truck. The judge really focused on that specific moment when they were on the phone, even saying that her behavior prior to that was not criminal. In August of 2017, she was sentenced to 30 months of incarceration, with half of the sentence suspended. She would not begin serving that sentence until February of 2019 because the judge let her stay free on bail until she had exhausted her state appeals. She was released from prison in January of 2020, having served less than a year. Evidently, she was a model prisoner and earned early release through good behavior. Now moving to the mental health and personality factors. This is a very challenging case. There are many people on both sides of this. Some people believe that Michelle Carter has no conscience. She's a monster, evil, a sociopath. Others believe that Carter and Roy were mentally ill and vulnerable. What happened was a tragedy, but Carter did not have a criminal state of mind. Another theory here could be that she was exercising free speech. And I think that's really one of the sticking points when people kind of think about this case in terms of what she said and was it criminal or not. Like so many cases that involve a tragedy, when somebody first sees the text messages, the reaction initially is to think that Carter is some type of villain who not only caused Roy's death, but enjoyed the fact that he died. So we see that many people think there's a sadistic component here as well. On closer examination, the story is actually much more complex. How does somebody go from being supportive for a 2-year time period and then move to being such a negative influence? So to break this down, I will first look at the nature of their relationship. Looking through the text messages, they had a strange, disconnected back and forth. Sometimes it almost seems like parallel communication, and other times they are clearly paying attention to each other and responding accordingly. Carter used a number of references from the show Glee in her text messages and seemed to over-romanticize their relationship. There was some real shallowness in the communication, which is part of texting anyway, but this was even above and beyond what would be expected. This did not appear to be a mature or well-developed relationship. The lack of depth made all of the existential discussions really not seem to fit at all. Like you have this very heavy topic inserted into a light conversational structure, almost like trying to break a rock apart with a rubber mallet. The tone of the communication was also fatalistic. Romeo and Juliet was referenced. There was this tone that was created like they were star-crossed lovers, and their fate was immutable. When a couple starts comparing themselves to Romeo and Juliet, this is usually a bad sign for the relationship. It's a depressing narrative that tends to get more traction when both people are depressed. I think because it appears to retain a positive, namely romance, in the context of something very negative, namely overwhelming sadness. Now, another thing I noticed here is that they thought that they were destined for hell. So they believed this. We see this in the text messages. This rarely follows something wonderful. Like if somebody said they were just accepted into college, and then they said, by the way, they were destined for hell, that really puts a damper on the mood. It's kind of like saying, I'm carrying a bomb. No one pays attention to what someone said before that. It's a matter of priority. So if somebody went to a store and said, can I have change for a $10 bill? And by the way, I'm carrying a bomb. No one would say, is a 5 and 5 ones okay? Again, it draws attention, and that destined to hell statement really does the same thing. That's really something that draws the focus of attention and makes one wonder about the type of thinking that they were having. This relationship really seemed to me more like a fantasy than the beginning of a serious, long-term relationship grounded in reality. Roy appeared to taunt Carter at times by saying that he was going to follow through with his plan and then failing to communicate with her, making her believe that he had died. But in each of these instances, except for the last, he did not follow through. So we can see where he kind of causes a lot of stress in that relationship and pulls Carter into a lot of strong emotions repeatedly over an extended period of time. It would appear that they had an unhealthy relationship. One could argue that relationships, among other things, serve the needs of the individuals. So I started to wonder what needs were being met on each side of this equation. For Carter, perhaps this relationship represented hope, a future, an unfulfilled desire for a romantic connection, a sense of belonging, being important to somebody, or feeling special. For Roy, it seems a little less clear. It's almost like he may have wanted a person to be able to hear how bad his depression was without running to the authorities, mental health professionals, or to his family members. As a couple interacts, they often change a little to try to better meet the needs of the other person. I think this may have happened in this case. It seems as if Carter tried one strategy for a long time, but did not view her strategy of encouragement as being helpful to Roy. Therefore, she adapted to another role. Here's one way we can look at this. When a person is struggling with depression, as it appears that Roy was, they always have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. These characters represent situations and relationships in their lives. For example, Roy getting his captain's license and looking forward to a future represented the angel. His social anxiety and feelings of sadness were the devil. It's not clear that Carter was really either one of these figures, but it would appear that she thought of herself as the angel. It seems as though Roy wanted her to support him in a bad decision, in a self-destructive decision. Roy wanted her to be the devil. He seemed to make that fairly clear. She resisted and tried to hold onto her role as the angel, but eventually she would become the devil on his shoulder that he wanted her to be. In a way, Carter became an amplification of Roy's will, an extension of it. She didn't introduce the desire. Rather, she adopted it from Roy and reflected it back to him. So in one sense, they're really more like conspirators, as opposed to Carter committing a crime against Roy. Which brings up this question. Is what Roy did criminal? Right? Most people would say no. So how could Carter have been a conspirator to something that wasn't a crime? So this gets a little tricky and brings me to my next section. Was she guilty of involuntary manslaughter? Well, her behavior was certainly not consistent with commonly accepted morals in society. It was reprehensible and destructive. But that's not the standard for conviction of involuntary manslaughter. The charge requires wanton or reckless conduct that leads to someone's death. I don't believe that the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt that her behavior caused Roy's death. I think they did prove that she was wanton and reckless, but that's not enough for a conviction. Again, the whole case really hinged on the idea that she told Roy to get back in the truck. Yet, she didn't take the stand. They don't have a recording. It was based on a text message where she said she did that. So the state is going to believe that Carter's text message was true, but they indicated that a number of other messages she sent were lies. So they're really saying that Carter tells the truth when it helps their case, but she's lying when it helps her case. I think it's reasonable to believe that she made up the statement because she was trying to seek attention, and not because she actually told Roy to get back in that vehicle. As offensive and narcissistic as her behavior appears, lying is not the same thing as involuntary manslaughter. The interesting thing about this case is that I actually think a better argument was made that her text messages contributed to Roy's actions. The judge said that this part of her behavior did not rise to the level of a crime. Now, I don't think it did either, but I think those messages stand out as more convincing evidence. For one thing, we know that they actually happened, unlike the alleged statement she made about getting back in the vehicle. In those text messages, she just keeps harping on the same idea. Are you going to do it today? Do it now. You just need to do it. It was much different than if she'd said, oh, I thought you were going to do that today. Like one time because she was genuinely curious. That's still morbid and morally wrong, but it's a lot different than the repetitive use of these text messages. I think it makes sense that what she did should have been illegal. The behavior that she manifested was reckless, dangerous, uncaring, cold, and frightening. Unfortunately, I think that this behavior occurs all the time, but is not captured as it was in a case like this. If she had pushed him just through the phone, by talking to him on the phone, she never would have been caught. The text messages really led to her conviction. This is such a challenging case because of the level of tragedy. And I think sometimes it's difficult for people to worry too much about free speech when somebody's life was lost needlessly. I find it interesting that to and from the courthouse, people yelled to Michelle Carter saying that she should kill herself. Many people screamed that at her. If she had acted on those cruel outbursts, would those people who yelled be convicted of involuntary manslaughter? If her conviction was just, would their conviction be just as well? Or is it really about acting within a pre-existing relationship? Or are there other factors specific to her situation that make her guilty when those people are not guilty? This is an interesting case without any easy answers. So those are my thoughts on the Michelle Carter case. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.